What should have been a simple exchange after a breakup turned deadly. Police say 18-year-old Emily Finn went to her ex-boyfriend's house to return his things and never walked back out. Her ex, 18-year-old Austin Lynch, is now accused of shooting and killing her and faces a murder charge. And as details surface, a troubling picture emerges. A teenage romance with tensions brewing long before that final visit. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Real quick before we dive into this episode of On the Case, I want to talk about our partner Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys, and they've recovered $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million when insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million, 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim from your phone. So if you're injured, you can start a claim at forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. A teenage ballerina was allegedly shot and killed by her ex-boyfriend in a devastating act of violence that has shattered a Long Island community. Now, as 18-year-old Emily Finn is mourned, her ex-boyfriend, Austin Lynch, now faces a murder charge as stories are emerging about what could have possibly led to this tragedy. Police say it happened in a home in Wisconsin, New York during Thanksgiving break. Emily was home from college. She had to return belongings after a recent breakup, and that is when, according to investigators, her 17-year-old ex-boyfriend, who was one day shy of turning 18, of adulthood, allegedly fired 2 shots from a shotgun. The first killed Emily. The second, allegedly aimed at his own face, left him critically injured. Now, as he awaits charges, a friend of his family is speaking out, pointing to the heartbreak of the breakup as the motive behind the alleged violence. But a trail of social media photos paints a more layered picture, not just prom photos and vacations, but images of the ex-boyfriend posing with guns on family outings in a home environment that appears to celebrate toughness. This case is all about an 18-year-old Long Island woman, her name Emily Finn. According to The Independent, she was a dedicated ballerina from the Bayport area of New York. She had just graduated from Sayville High School, and she had started her freshman year at SUNY Oneonta. She was studying to become a teacher. Her artistic director told Newsday that she was a beloved leader at her dance studio, and she was described by those who knew her as a vibrant, warm presence. Then, there's her ex-boyfriend, Austin Lynch. The New York Post reported that he was 17, a recent high school graduate, and according to reports, he recently had enlisted in the Marines. His family lived in Wisconsin. It's about a 20-minute drive from Emily's hometown. The Post reports that the two had a history. They dated, they went to prom together, they even took family vacations together. But by Thanksgiving of this year, that relationship had recently ended. Police say it was just one day before Thanksgiving, Wednesday, November 27th, when it all ended in tragedy. Emily was home from college, likely looking forward to the holiday. According to investigators, her final stop was at her ex-boyfriend's house in Wisconsin a little after 11 in the morning. The reason police have given for her visit seems almost painfully ordinary. Suffolk County Detective Lieutenant Kevin Byer told Greater Long Island she was just there to return some of her ex's belongings after their split. What happened inside that home is where this shifts from a breakup story to a homicide investigation. Police allege that Austin Lynch, using a legally owned shotgun, fired 2 shots. The first shot struck and killed Emily Finn, and then the second shot, investigators say, he then turned on himself, firing into his own face. The 911 call came from inside the house from Austin's dad. That's according to police. And when first responders arrived, Emily Finn was pronounced dead at the scene. Austin Lynch, critically injured but alive, was rushed to the hospital. He survived. The next day, Thanksgiving, was also his 18th birthday. He spent it in a hospital bed. In the days that have followed, a wave of grief has swept through the community. Vigils were held. Pink ribbons, Emily's favorite color, appeared everywhere. While Lynch recovered in the hospital, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office announced their intent that he would be charged with second-degree murder. But because he was 17 at the time of the alleged crime, Even by just a day, the application of New York's Raise the Age law means a future decision will determine whether he will be tried as an adult. His formal arrest and arraignment on the murder charge came once he was medically cleared. Now, while the community has been reeling from this devastating loss, a voice emerged trying to make sense of all of this. The New York Post reported, speaking to a source described as a friend of the Lynch family, who offered a startlingly personal theory for the alleged motive. This source, who claimed to have known the accused teen, Austin Lynch, since he was a young child, told the outlet that they were, quote, disgusted by the alleged actions, but their explanation pointed away from premeditation or hidden history and toward a single, overwhelming emotion. According to the Post account, this source framed the tragedy as the catastrophic result of a teenage breakup. They allegedly described the relationship as, quote, young puppy love that stopped making sense, and claimed the teen was emotionally unequipped to handle the split. The source is quoted as giving a blunt psychological assessment, saying, quote, the frontal lobe is still undeveloped and not equipped to handle and process these emotions. The inability of a kid to process this, it feels like the world is coming to an end. Perhaps most notably, the source directly countered any victim-blaming rumors, stating, quote, people are in the comments like she must have done something to him. No, she didn't. This account, as reported, constructs a specific version of events, a heartbroken young man, not a calculating predator, who was allegedly overwhelmed by the pain that he just couldn't process. Now, even as that personal narrative was taking shape, a different kind of picture was coming into focus online, not from confidential sources, but from a public trail of social media posts, many of which came from the account of Austin Lynch's own family. We here at Law&Crime, we've uncovered photos of the pair in what appeared to be happier times. Pictures of Emily and Austin at prom, Emily smiling in a bright magenta dress, a photo still publicly visible on Austin's mom's Facebook showing what looked like a family on vacation in Aruba. Emily included right there in the group shot. It suggested a relationship that was deeply intertwined with family. There was another photo of the two of them, this one apparently taken down after the tragedy, and then you scroll back a little bit, and there's a post from his father's Facebook dated nearly 3 years to the day before the alleged crime. Shows a much younger Austin Lynch holding a shotgun. The caption on that post reads, quote, a little trap shooting for the birthday boy. There are multiple images of Austin and his father lifting weights together. One caption openly celebrates this, stating, quote, family time equals gym time in the Lynch house. By Sunday, November 30th, more than 1,000 people packed a funeral home in West Sayville, New York, for Emily's service. According to reports from the New York Post, mourners wore pink at the family's request. One display were Emily's pink ballet slippers, a poster of her with a flute from Sayville High School when she was in the marching band, and tokens of her academic achievements. Online, a GoFundMe campaign launched for her family described Emily as a part of the fabric of the lives she touched. It raised tens of thousands of dollars within the first 48 hours. The Sayville Alumni Association released a formal statement saying her death, quote, leaves an indelible void where a future of promise once stood. Joining us now to talk more about this case is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Chase Brown. Thank you for being with us. What a sad story out on Long Island. Knowing that the suspect in this case, that he allegedly shot himself in the face, serious injuries that he's dealing with, and what appears to be a botched murder-suicide. How does that factor into how this case could play out now that there's a case against him?
So it plays in a few different ways. I mean, the biggest thing I would argue from a defense standpoint is it's certainly a mitigating factor. I mean, in New York State, the maximum sentence on a murder second degree is 25 to life. There is an ability to work that sentence down 23, 20 years, something like that. So it's not excusing his behavior, but it is a mitigating factor that he did harm himself, and I don't know the extent of those injuries, so it certainly factors in. And that's something I would mitigate. And as a prosecutor, the other version is it doesn't really matter. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had the full intent here, and he intended to take his life at the end, and he obviously wasn't successful, but there shouldn't be a mitigating factor. So I think that whatever side you're on, I think you use it in that aspect. From a defense, there is a strong mitigating argument to be made.
And a fascinating part of this, too, from a legal perspective, obviously an incredibly tragic case, is that he's 17 years old, but in a day he was going to turn 18. You don't see that often where it comes down to literally 24 hours between adult and then minor. How does that factor into how this could go?
So either way, it's a murder second degree, which is one of the few statutes in New York State that makes it eligible to stay in criminal court. There are a lot of crimes up to a certain point where they can get transferred. Murders is not one of those. So, the difference in the day or so, in this case, on a murder second degree, I don't think makes such a difference. If he was younger, 15, 14, something like that, but it is one of these crimes that will stay, has the ability to stay. So ultimately, it's going to be up to the judge. I don't see a judge in this county who is going to approve removing this to family court. I think it belongs in criminal court, and I think, frankly, that's where it's going to stay.
When it's a case like this where it's not really a whodunit in terms of the person who shot and killed this young woman and she loses her life, from the standpoint of the prosecutors, as they're going to look at this and they build their case, how do you go about that, knowing that the truth is it's not going to be difficult to prove that he was the one who pointed the gun, fired it, and then took this young woman's life?
So from a prosecution standpoint, I mean, there is a lot of investigative work to be done. I would probably look at phone work, right? I would look at the text messages and phone calls that is taking place between these two people, the victim and the defendant, in terms of the plan to come over to, for the victim to come to his house, the breakup, right? What surrounded that situation, the social media. I would get a search warrant for both phones to see, what was the communication? Is there something? Is he speaking to another friend about how upset he is? Stuff like that to kind of build up in the intent. Certainly intent does not need to be planned, but if you can get phone work that's going to show it's been planned in the past, it goes much more to it. I mean, a defense argument could be it's circumstantial. I mean, it's tough, but I do think that you want to build up the background so that if it did go to trial one day, you can show the jury, hey, look, this has been going on for a while. He committed at this date, but he'd been planning this, or it was leading up to that.
Because from the defense's point of view, if you're taking over this case, at what point do you kind of surrender that part of it in saying, like, look, he was the one who fired the gun, now let's talk about some of the things that led up to this moment?
Probably pretty early on. This is something, again, goes back to a mitigation standpoint. This is something where you'd probably have to ask the judge to accept a plea, right? You have to plead to the court, plead guilty to whatever charges are on there, and have a sentence from the judge. I would get a mitigation package together the best I can. Maybe do some mental health evaluation, see if there's anything there to come at it from different angles, because from a legal perspective, fact-based, I think you're going to have a tough time as a defense attorney here.
And we've seen in cases like domestic violence, if people were married and they're going through a divorce and you see this, very sadly, things can turn tragic. In this case, it was, teenage love, as some have framed it. I think puppy love was the term that one person used to describe this, and they're young kids and he doesn't know how to handle his emotions in this moment. How does the court look at something like this, where it is, two young people and they were going through this tough breakup, as opposed to if this was a case where they were in their 40s, they had been married, or, they had a relationship that goes south? How does the court view, even if it is still an adult court, we're still talking about someone who's 18 years old?
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely goes to the fact that your brain is not fully developed. I mean, I know that some studies or whatever will say it's not till your early 20s. So that factors in. Do you have the ability, the decision-making ability to realize that the consequences of your actions, thinking past just the immediate emotional reaction? How do you handle those emotions? So that goes to, again, I think another mitigating factor as to why you should lessen the sentence. I mean, I don't think this is something where you get off by reason of mental defect. What I mean by that is a defense where, you lack the capacity to understand what's going on, or an insanity defense. I don't think it rises to that level. But I think it goes to just trying to trim those numbers down in terms of the sentence, the ultimate sentence you get. It's definitely something that would play into it, though. It's certainly goes to how to process emotion and process your actions and understand the consequences, because at that age you are very short-sighted.
When you're a defense attorney in a case like this and you're trying to understand what was going on, you're trying to get the clear picture. I know in the case of this relationship, like, they had gone to prom together, they went on vacations with their families, so there was a lot of people who saw them publicly in a relationship who probably were not, even if they did have some sort of issue, would never have expected it to go the direction that it allegedly has. As a defense attorney, how do you start to gather information and try to put together the picture of what you think will be a good defense for a client like this?
So I would get the background of the whole family, the siblings, parents, background of how this young man was raised in terms of how he was doing in school. If there's anything in his childhood that affected him, is there any trauma? Is there any diagnosis? Does he have any sort of mental health issues? Even go back to his school records. How is he doing in school? Because the problem is he on paper they're going to paint him. He's painted as a murderer, but we need to put a face to that name and give a little more background and humanize this individual who's charged with this. So you have to look towards family background, any trauma that may have occurred in his childhood, and then see if there's some friends and additional people who could write letters and character references and try and bring some of the positives of this young man into the equation.
When it comes to, because I know that there's been, and in the past we've seen when people talk about a young person's brain, it's not fully developed, they don't know how to handle the emotions. We were just talking about it a little while ago in this. But he's still an adult. I mean, if he's now 18 years old, I guess how much weight does that argument carry in court when it comes to, like studies will show that his brain isn't fully developed, but he's also not the first person ever to go through a breakup.
I mean, the 17 to the 18, I mean, is it really that different from the day before to the next day? No. It's an arbitrary number in that sense. But I think it's the young age in it itself. So he's not 25. He hasn't had the life experiences that a 25 or 30-year-old might have, or even a 20-year-old. I mean, he was still in high school. It didn't appear that he had left home yet. He never been on his own. He hadn't had the opportunity to essentially care for himself. He's been under the care of his parents this whole time. So I think it does factor in. I mean, he doesn't have the maturity and life experiences that you could say an adult, someone who's older than that, you could say 100% you can hold them accountable for everything they did. He might not have that experience to do so.
And when it comes to if this ends up, and I know we're still in the early stages of, and this is probably getting ahead of ourselves, but if it is pleading to the court and kind of putting the mercy on a judge to make a decision, what does that process look like in New York?
So that process is there'd be a bunch of conference dates, right, with the court and the district attorney and seeing where they would go. And then if the district attorney is not willing to make an offer or you think, this is something I need to go to the judge, the way I would do it is I would get the package. When I say a package, I would get the mitigating factors together. If I needed a therapist or a psychologist or some doctor to interview him to get a report on him, to see where his mental capacity is at, character letters from the family, a full background, almost a binder, I would say, if not more, of mitigating material to then submit to the judge, and then hopefully the judge would give me the opportunity to also, verbally make my case as to what number we're looking for. But it's a process. It's going to take months. It could be a year. It's not something that happens quickly because there is a lot of work that goes into it.
And then what, I guess, falls into the judge? And if for this, second degree murder charge, it's 25 to life, does eventually, the judge has a hearing, a sentencing hearing like we've seen, and then, they make a decision about what the sentence is going to be?
Correct. So, I mean, you would go into the process having an idea of what the judge is going to give in terms of the number. Like I said before, the max is 25 to life, minimum is 15. So you could get any number within that range to life. I mean, you're still getting parole essentially on the after the sentence, after your time incarcerated, but you can get that range there. So you would know going into it, an idea of what the number would be, and then you go through a process of being interviewed by probation. You'd also submit your package as well, mitigation package, and then you would ultimately have the sentencing date. But you wouldn't go into that process without having an idea of what the number would be. Because once you plead guilty, that's it. I mean, all bets are off, right? You're essentially at the mercy of the judge, so you want to make sure you know where they're going to be prior to going into that.
Because I feel like I've been I have been at sentencing hearings before, and it always stands out to me just being an observer of it, where it could be hours long and everybody's giving emotional testimony for whatever the crime may have been, but then it comes to that moment where a judge makes a decision on what a sentence is going to be, or it could be like a bond hearing, and they make a decision on whether someone has bond, and it seems like the judge, after what could be hours of testimony, takes like 30 seconds looking things over and then makes that decision. How much in those moments, and this is more generally speaking, how much of an impact does, that particular day and that hearing have on what the sentence is going to be?
It's a case-by-case basis. I don't think that it could impact every single case. I have seen cases where the way the defendant acts towards the judge in court that day, what I mean by that is, are they remorseful? Are they apologizing? Are they saying, sorry to the victims in a victim-sensitive case? Are they apologizing to the victims? Are they admitting their guilt? Or is it someone who's going to get up there and say, even after being found guilty by a jury, which is what our system rests on, I still maintain my innocence, I'm going to appeal, I didn't do this, right? That factors into the judge. So I think that is a huge deal, how someone acts towards the judge in terms of, remorse. And then, if the judge isn't aware of some of the impact that a victim may have had, I mean, all those victim impact statements can be incredibly impactful and painful and, very, very hard for everyone to sit through just because of how traumatizing, some of these crimes can be. So it's case by case. But I think I really think it comes down to how that defendant is going to act in court. Are they going to apologize, or are they just going to still maintain their innocence and that's in a trial situation. But the short answer is case by case, but those are some of the factors.
And when it comes for the prosecutors in this case, and again, it's not a situation where you're trying to figure out who took this young woman's life. We pretty much know what happened, and we know that there was this breakup and all these things, going into it. And she's never going to be here again. She loses her life. She had an incredibly bright future, and her life is lost. What goes into a prosecutor's decision about whether or not you make a deal so you don't have to go through a trial, but then at the same time making sure that the family, the communities, that they have the justice that they're looking for because it was their loved one who was lost?
Right, absolutely. So it's going to come down to, so if they were to go to trial, the family, I'm sure, this young girl's parents are going to be there every day. Their family is going to be there every day. A trial is a trial. I mean, you have to still prove your case. So you have to prove the death. You have to prove that this young man intentionally did it. And at a trial, it comes along with, there's autopsies and photos, and the family's forced to sit there every day and relive the most traumatizing moment of their lives, I'm sure. So there is something to be said about avoiding that process, pleading guilty. But at the same time, you have to have a number a sentence that gives closure to the family, that provides justice for everyone involved. So, if you can find that number that avoids a trial, avoids that, really grueling process for the family, but also is the right number for this defendant to plead guilty to. I think that's what gets it done. But again, trials are trials, and you have sympathy. You can't have sympathy. You can't consider it at a trial, but you still have to prove your case. You have to go through everything that happened, and that's not. The family would be there, and it's something that would be very difficult for sure.
And if this ends up going to trial, and let's just say that the defendant tries his hand at whatever it may be with who knows what develops in terms of evidence as this process goes on, if there's a guilty verdict, who decides what the sentence would be?
It's totally up to the judge at that point. The judge will make the decision. If this case were to go to trial from the defense standpoint, and obviously if he's found guilty, the mitigating factors I brought up before probably comes into play again. You're probably going to submit that same package back to the judge again, to try and mitigate that number. However, at this point, and you can't punish someone for exercising their right to go to trial, but there's something to be said about the victim's family having to come every day and sitting through this. So, again, you're going to try and bring that number down as much as possible. But now you've been found guilty by a jury of your peers. That's our system, and it's up to the judge at that point.
Yeah, and we'll see how this case plays out. Still in the very early stages. Very tragic case out of Long Island. Chase Brown, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law&Crime. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
For now, Austin Lynch remains in custody, charged with second-degree murder. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.